And now it is my pleasure to introduce Rav Shai. Take us away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. It is nice to see a handful of faces. Um, I'm going to jump right in because there are several stages to this argument that I want to lead folks through. Not all of them, in my mind, are equally important. So I want to get through the whole presentation and really leave time for your questions and observations. So here we go. All right. My claim is that factory farmed beef is Treif. And the first question to address is that it's really not, sorry, is that this is going to be one long argument. And so these are the stations of the argument until we really get to factory farmed beef. So we're going to be defining our terms. And what I think is the most important piece of this presentation is looking at what the purpose of Judaism is. And if we understand and agree that the purpose of Judaism is something that is in contradiction to the consequences of factory farmed beef, then I'm going to show how Jewish law has been amended and fortified over the course of 2,000 years in order to deal with contingencies that have arisen that were not previously foreseen that go against Jewish values. So technically, factory farmed beef is not treif because treif or treifa is a technical halachic term that means torn. So when an animal was torn in the field, that means it wasn't properly slaughtered, shechita, and that's when it is designated as treif. In other words, the animal has to be potentially kosher for it to be a treifa or treif. That's not how the term is used in Yiddish. Something that is treif in Yiddish just means that it's not kosher. As opposed to the technical meaning, which is a cow that has been either slaughtered improperly or has been attacked by other predatory animals in the field or by very aggressive cow tippers. That animal is rendered treifa, but that's not the sense that I am using the term. I'm using the term as something that is not kosher. So then the question becomes, what is kosher? So kosher still does mean fitting, but it used to apply to lots of different things, right? The height of a sukkah. You can have a kosher sukkah or an unkosher sukkah. The quantity of matzah that you must eat while leaning left or perhaps right if you're left-handed. Having sex on Shabbat is either kosher or not, depending on with whom you're having sex and whether or not the laws of family purity are being observed. Health and safety concerns, animal welfare, right? You see the list. And then at the very end, yeah, food too. Food too needs to be kosher. But it used to be that there was this wide spectrum, this wide scope that Jewish society, that the Jewish community would apply the term kosher to make sure that everything was on the up and up. When we're talking about animals, kashrut used to involve the entire life cycle of the animals, as well as the rest of the farm or the ranch's ecosystem, right? How you dealt with the employees, right? That turned out to be a big issue about 10 years ago in America. But now kashrut has really been minimized to the moment of the animal's death, rather than taking a look at the entirety of the animal's life. That is sad to me. Okay, so we've defined our terms. Now, on one foot, what is Judaism about? So this is a great little parlor game that you can play at your next party or at the next Seder. What is Judaism about in one sentence? I'm going to give you a chance to think about it. Right? If you had one sentence to tell somebody from outer space what Judaism is, This is what I would recommend you to say. Judaism is about getting to, staying on, and once exiled, returning to the land. That's what the narrative arc of the Hebrew Bible is about. That's what all, and when I say all, I actually mean all of the commandments are geared toward getting us to the land of Israel, staying in the land of Israel, and then once we're exiled, returning to the land of Israel. And that's why the most frequent rationale for the mitzvot that we find is to live long on the land that the Lord your God has given you. I see a hand from Myron Katz, and I'm happy to take a question. Myron, you want to unmute yourself?
That question was asked of by Hillel, you might recall. And he
No,
said,
no,
yes,
I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to cut you off because I don't want to spend too much time on a wild goose chase.
but I also
He
want to say,
was. I'm
I also want
sorry.
to say that I
Yeah,
think that when I use the
I'm
word,
gonna. I'm gonna. Myron, let me talk. Thank you. So Hillel was talking about the essence of Judaism, which is not doing anything objectionable that you find objectionable to somebody that you would find objectionable, not doing that to somebody else. The reason why he could boil Judaism down to that one rule or one standard, um, reg, one standard, is precisely because that was the best way for the Israelites and then later the Jews of the land of Israel to maintain a cohesive social unit in the land of Israel. Okay. Now, I said that that was the Hebrew Bible's um, central idea, but it's not just the Hebrew Bible's central idea. The two places where you can go in rabbinic Judaism to understand what the consensus of the rabbis is the prayer book and the Haggadah. So the Haggadah is coming up next year in Jerusalem. We're looking forward to getting back. Right now that we are back, hopefully to stay in Israel, we say next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. Hashanah Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim HaBenuyah. But that's just once a year, 3 times a day, every day, right, except for Shabbat and the holidays. We offer these 13 petitionary prayers. And people often say these prayers without understanding exactly what the goal is of these prayers. And so I just want to point out the bold terms. We're asking for understanding of how we should behave so that in those ways in which we are off the mark in our behavior, we should repent. And by that process, there will be an ingathering of the exiles into the land of Israel, a reestablishment of the Sanhedrin, of the justice system, a prayer for the righteous to administer the affairs of the state and build the temple. And at the very end of that process, notice at the very end, the process of redemption is culminating with the arrival of the Messiah. So it is something that we initiate and the Messiah concludes. And that's what all of our prayers, all of our petitionary prayers are geared towards. Now that we've been exiled, getting us back to the land of Israel, establishing the temple, and establishing a righteous judicial system. That is not something that I think a lot of Jews who live outside of the land of Israel fully understand, but that's absolutely what was primary in the minds of the rabbis who wrote the Talmud, who wrote the Midrash, who compiled the prayer book, as well as the Haggadah. So I want to show you one example of a law that was created in order to further that goal of living long on the land. So it says in the Mishnah is the very earliest legal document of rabbinic Judaism. It says that you can't raise small domesticated animals, sheep and goats, in the settled areas of the land of Israel. You can raise them in Syria, meaning across the river and up, right, on the other side of the Golan Heights, or in the wilderness of the land of Israel. I just want to point out that this is not a biblical law. The rabbis made this up on their own. And why did they make it up? Right? Maimonides explains in a very plain sense way that you can't raise small animals because they graze on crops. And those crops are able to feed more people than the small animals that are grazing on can accommodate. So it's about the allocation of resources. It's about preserving your resources for human consumption. And what the rabbis are doing is they're limiting consumption of a luxury good, meat. Most people can't afford meat at the time, in order to maintain the production of staples, that which is grown, that the animals, the small livestock, are themselves eating. So notice this is not a ban. You can still import small domesticated animals from Syria or elsewhere. You can also raise them outside of the domesticated areas. But this is a great example of where the rabbis in the Mishnah, right, the very earliest layer of Judaism, they prohibited something that the Bible allows in order to further the goal of providing enough food for the people to live on the land and to be able to afford the food and not be crowded out by wealthy people who prefer to have lamb chops at the expense of the agricultural kind of opportunity cost of growing feed or growing grains on that property. All right, before I get to this, I'm going to stop and take questions. Okay. So this, yes, Myron.
So your title of your talk is factory farms. It seems like you can raise the beef on a non-factory farm. Kissing the ground shows you how to do it. Are you opposed to that?
Can we wait till the end?
Sure.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so this is the longest and the most complicated piece of Torah that I'm going to teach today. And it basically says what my teacher, Elliot Dorff, says on the right, which is when we find an opportunity to expand the halakha, to expand the law, to improve our morality, we should take advantage of it. So in one rational sentence, he says what the Sfas Emes says on this sheet. And it's important for me to read the Sfas Emes because he represents Hasidic Judaism, ultra-Orthodox Judaism, and it is an extension of the traditional Jewish way of thinking that I think applies very much to our situation today. So he's asking a question about the second paragraph of the Shema that comes after the V'ahavta. Im shmoa tishma'u el mitzvotai. Im shmoa tishma'u. So if you listen to my mitzvot, but the way that biblical Hebrew works, there is a doubling of that verb, listen. So that's why he is commenting on why it says shmoah and then tishma'u. So the issue of this doubling of the language of listen. The doubling means that if you've listened to what's old, you'll listen or you'll hear something new. So if you have tuned in to God's revelation in the past, you'll be attuned to God's revelation today. Why? God's great voice never stops. This is standard rabbinic theology. We don't talk much in Judaism about theology, but this is standard rabbinic theology. God's great voice never stops because words are alive and God is always giving Torah. That's why the blessing when you finish a Torah reading is noten HaTorah in the present tense. God is giving Torah. Thus, according to how one upholds the Torah and mitzvot, the commandments, one is able to hear or sense novelties at every moment. Now we've got a couple of comparisons. This is like an infant nursing at her mother's breast. When the infant sucks, milk is expressed. For those of you who might not have had the experience of nursing a child, the need for more milk is precipitated, is catalyzed by the nursing of the baby. And when the mother has milk and the baby does not nurse, it's actually painful. So the rabbis have a beautiful saying that more than the heifer wants to nurse, the calf wants to suck. I said that exactly wrong. I said that exactly backwards. The rabbinic statement is more than the calf wants to suck, the heifer wants to nurse. The heifer wants to nurse. Okay. This is also the issue with the midrash of we will do and we will understand. One knows through the doing and is able to understand increasingly more. When the Torah and the prayer books say, Ashrei ha'ish sheyishma lemitzvotecha, happy is the one who listens to or obeys your commandments, it really means not listening to, but listening for your commandments. Ashrei ha'ish sheyishma lemitzvotecha. That preposition le can mean to, but it can also mean for. And that's how the Sfas Emes is understanding it. Through this power of listening, sages can draw forth oral Torah that lies dormant. And here's the punchline. And then the sages of each generation can broaden the Torah's light. I can't read this, hold on. Can broaden the Torah's light at each moment, and so too can each individual. So this is an ultra-Orthodox Hasidic master in 1900 advocating the promotion of new ways of broadening Torah's light at each moment by implementing what we hear from God's voice that never ceases. Pretty powerful, right? Radical. Hasidic Judaism didn't go in that direction of radical reappropriation or design of Jewish law, but other forms of Judaism did. Okay. What I want to show you here is that the idea that there are different kinds of values that have caused rabbis to remove the hechsher, the stamp of rabbinic approval, is something that we've seen all through Jewish history, and most recently in Israel over the issue of modesty. So I was in Israel in 1993. I was there when this happened. And this was during the Cola Wars. Some of you, Jack, you don't remember this, but the older people remember between Coke and Pepsi. And Pepsi was using Britney Spears, and they were using scantily clad women to promote their cola of choice. And what one of the rabbinic koshering agencies did was to say, you know what? Your advertising campaigns are treif, and we're going to remove our hechsher. So I'll just read this. Complaining that Pepsi was promoting a culture that would corrupt the nation's youth. Sounds like Socrates. Through rock music concerts and advertisements featuring scantily clad women, rabbinical authorities revoked a certificate declaring that the soft drink conforms to Jewish dietary laws and is kosher. Okay. So what we would call this is a boycott. And that's what giving a hechsher and taking away a hechsher is. It's an economic boycott against the product. In this case, the formula, the secret formula for Pepsi has not changed, but there are other values that are deemed to be objectionable by the rabbinic authorities who are giving their stamp of approval to this product, and therefore the rabbinic stamp of approval was removed. This I find very interesting. Even ideas can be treif. So this is an ad for Pepsi. It shows our ancestors slowly becoming bipedally erect until finally we have a pont and we're drinking Pepsi Cola. Okay, so that kind of march of progress, which is dependent upon our understanding of evolution, as well as our sense of humor, that was enough to get Badatz, the Beit Din Tzedek, another koshering agency, to remove, again, Pepsi's hechsher, because they didn't want to be seen as promoting evolution. Okay, so that's my example of a contemporary rabbinic authority. In this case, they're both Orthodox, implementing an economic boycott or a removal of the hechsher because the values that that product represents go against the values that the rabbis want to promote. Yep. Okay. So here's a concise statement of the halakha. This is about individual health now. One has a positive duty to remove and guard oneself of any life-threatening obstacle. If one did not remove the obstacle, one has canceled a positive mitzvah and transgressed do not bring blood guilt. The continuation in the Shulchan Aruch, the 16th century code of law. This is just a general statement. The sages prohibited many things because of danger to people. And now we're going to get some really interesting examples. A person must never put his mouth to a pipe spouting water and drink, because you never know what's in the water. That's pretty good advice. You also shouldn't drink from rivers or ponds at night when you can't see what's in the water, for fear that he might swallow a leech without seeing it, right? This is very good rabbinic advice. I am going to double down on this, right? And say that you should not drink from rivers or ponds at night because you might ingest a leech. Okay. So this gives you an idea that the rabbis were very ready to lay down prohibitions in order to keep everybody safe and healthy, even when the odds of things, of untoward, unhealthful things happening might not be particularly high. Okay. So this part, I'm going to spend relatively little time justifying, because anybody who's here knows this, that factory farmed cattle present a danger to the purpose of Judaism, living long on the land. Now, what I've done is to switch the land of Israel to the land, the big blue marble, the entire land of the earth. That's true. And it's also true, as we all know, that no individual piece of real estate can be environmentally cordoned off from its neighbors and what else is going on in the world. So global warming affects Israel more than it affects the United States in particular, because Israel is on the front lines right? I want people to remember where Israel is. It's up against the Mediterranean. The Negev Desert has already suffered from climate change. The port at the Red Sea, the waters have increased, and certain kinds of wildlife are dying off in Eilat, right? And they're really on the front lines. Okay. So let's just go through a couple of the big ticket items about climate change as it relates to the production of factory farm cattle. You need land to pasture the animals. That land comes about through deforestation. When we chop down those forests in the Amazon and elsewhere, we're taking out the carbon sinks, that the carbon dioxide that is produced in all kinds of ways in the production process, right, is able to be absorbed by. So in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest alone, 65% of all deforestation can be tied back to cattle ranching. Right, that's a lot. So it's not only that we're removing what can absorb carbon dioxide, we're also increasing the production of greenhouse gases. So according to the FAO, farmed animal production is responsible for 14.5% of all human-caused global greenhouse gas emissions. Of that 14.5%, 65%, right, comes from farming. And from farming cows, and so that's about 9.4%. Okay, there are other reasons, there are other aspects of factory farming beef that contribute to environmental degradation. I've listed them on the right, but I'm taking it as a given that this population is knowledgeable about the dangers and the destructive nature of factory farming beef. So I'm really focusing my presentation on why, as a result of the danger and the harm that factory farmed beef causes, it should lose its hechsher. Okay, so these two rationales on the left strike me as the strongest reasons to have factory farmed beef lose its hechsher. The first has to do with really what we learned about in the Mishnah, that cattle consume inefficient quantities of land and fresh water relative to their ability to contribute to the caloric necessities of the human population. So feeding the hungry is a priority. Feeding the wealthy is not a priority. And so in many places in the world, it is still only the wealthy who can eat meat. And so the rabbis are very clear in their priorities and in their ladder of values that we want to make sure that everybody has enough food to eat. And then really what we've been talking about is the environmental degradation, right? We have between a quarter and a third of global greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed to food, with meat and dairy accounting for the lion's share. Livestock destroys forests and grasslands. And I think in North Carolina, there's a particular problem with the pollution from the runoff of pig waste leaching into the water tables and running off into the rivers and streams, creating these dead zones. So there's a number of secondary and tertiary externalities, right? Negative implications to the production of factory farmed beef. I frequently hear people talking about cruelty to animals and personal health as other reasons to prohibit factory farmed beef. I don't use those as reasons. I don't agree. Just briefly, I think that cruelty to animals is something that can be lessened And B is also something that is present in all kinds of medical experimentations. And so in order not to be hypocritical about why we prohibit one kind of cruelty and allow another kind of cruelty, I would rather not use cruelty to animals or tsar ba'alei chaim as a rationale. And also personal health, we allow people to do all kinds of things that might be injurious to their personal health. And it seems to me that eating beef, although certainly not healthful, is no more unhealthful than other kinds of things that Judaism doesn't speak to or doesn't prohibit. This is, I hope it's interesting to folks. Both the Pope in Laudato Si in 2015 and the UN, most recently at the Dubai conference, have called upon everybody to reduce beef consumption. So I don't know of any rabbis who have done that, but that's a problem according to the Talmud, because the Talmud is very clear, and this has been uh, reiterated in a number of realms since the Talmud wrote about this, is that Jews cannot be less moral than other people. So if there are folks in the vanguard of using moral arguments to reduce beef consumption, right? That's something that Judaism needs to take seriously. And I've never seen any rabbi use the example of beef as a way in which the Gentiles are promoting a form of morality that is greater than what the Jews are insisting upon. All right. Why am I picking on cows? Because I think cows are low-hanging fruit. Is that a mixed metaphor that cows are low-hanging fruit? I don't know. But like just take a look at that bar graph. Okay. I mean, I am a vegetarian, not a vegan, although I have reduced my dairy consumption, but I'm not a vegan. But I've been a vegetarian for 35 years, right? That's a long time. So I don't eat lamb. I don't eat shrimp anymore. I grew up with it. I'm from San Francisco. I had my seafood growing up. But beef, as we know, just generates methane in such volumes through flatulence and burping that it is particularly injurious to our atmosphere, and it contributes disproportionately to greenhouse gas emissions. And so what I am particularly interested in promoting is a blanket prohibition on, and Myron, now I'm getting to your point, on factory farmed beef in all synagogue and synagogue related functions. So I have heard the following responses. Jews are never going to stop eating beef, right? Like brisket is brisket, get over it, Shai, like it's just not happening. And I don't believe that's true. I think that people can change their behavior. And I think that in particular, rabbis have, I don't want to overstate the case, but rabbis have some degree of influence. And if we were to make a united statement from all the different denominations, that there is now sufficient reason to prohibit the consumption of factory farmed beef, I think that Jews would eat less beef. I've also heard that we're too insignificant a number for it to make any difference. That may be true, but so what? We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I also think that we are disproportionately influential. People take note of what the Jews do. And if the Jews were to do something this radical, I think it would catch people's attention. And this goes back to what Myron was suggesting. I want to allow for the possibility of pasture-raised kosher beef. And you've got two examples here, Grow and Behold and Whole Foods, that do that. It's going to be more expensive, And I think that's fine. I think supply and demand is a good way to reduce the consumption of cows. All right, coming to the end here. You should also know that cultured beef grown in a laboratory is just around the corner. It's already being marketed in some markets. Orthodox rabbis have said it is kosher. One rabbi even said, are you sitting down? That it's parv. One rabbi said that cultured beef is parv, which opens up the possibility of a kosher cheeseburger. I'm not going there, right? I've got enough on my plate. I am not going there. Okay. And just to conclude, I believe in my kishkas that we are meant to be a light unto the nations. And after spending last year, I spent a couple of weeks in Israel. I think that Israel can be a green light unto the nations. All right, so I am stopping my share, and we've got 13 minutes for discussion questions. I ran through it quickly, but I wanted to really leave time for us to talk.
I'm going to put that document back in the chat if you want to just say a word about what it is.
Yeah, in my mind, the most novel piece of what I presented today was the idea that the primary theme of the Hebrew Bible and the primary goal of Judaism is to get us, keep us, and bring us back to the land of Israel. So it's not in the scholarly world, it's not a particularly controversial claim, but outside of the scholarly world, it's not something that I think is widely understood or known about. So I wrote a piece called The Redemptive Implications of Rabbinic Theurgy. And the first half of that paper goes through the rationale and the evidence for having for living long on the land that the Lord your God is giving you be the primary goal of both the Hebrew Bible and Rabbinic Judaism. I go on from there to other fascinating topics, specifically the idea that it is through the performance of mitzvot that we strengthen God to the extent that God is then able to bring the Messiah for us, and that when we don't engage in mitzvot, we weaken God. And so the incentive from one school of rabbinic thought to engage in the mitzvot is to strengthen God in order that there will be a consequence, a natural byproduct of helping us.
If I may speak, first of all, I want to really applaud your speech, your talk. I have a lot I'd like to add. I don't know how to do it in this forum. I have a bit of a disagreement with you that I don't know if you really said it, or maybe I interpret it, that you think the Jews should live in Israel. I think you said that. I'm not sure. Maybe you implied it. I think we have a big influence in our various countries that makes a big difference on the global climate. And I think we need to take that role and run with it. And we're more effective on the inside of our countries making these comments than from within Israel. I think the environmental imperative to stop climate change is absolutely Jewish, as well as a lot of other ethnic and religious groups. And we have a big role to play. And so I don't know whether that contradicts what you said, but I certainly want to add my opinion about it.
I hear you. Thank you. No, I think we're on the same page that climate change is something that affects the whole world and therefore, by definition, affects Israel. And in particular, given Israel's geography, affects Israel more than many other places. Somebody else?
One of
Okay.
the one of the matters that I run into is that, so as certainly for Passover time, our Haggadah is dealing with the biblical times and the rules that existed at that time. And a great deal of those passages have to do with the narrow version of kashrut, namely dealing with the slaughtering of animals and how you're supposed to slaughter them properly and with the society that existed at that time. If we're trying to be observant to that story and such, is it really possible to stay away from the idea of meat consumption?
I'm just going to rephrase your question so that so that I can answer it in a way that makes sense to me. And then you'll tell me if I've answered the question that you asked, okay? Um, Not so much of the Haggadah, but so much of biblical literature, specifically the book of Leviticus, deals with kashrut. And given the emphasis and given the concern with kashrut in the biblical ecosystem, how can we, around the Passover table, move beyond that to look at issues that are more germane to both us and to the fundamental story of the enslaved Israelites being redeemed from Egypt, moving through the desert and ultimately looking toward the land of Israel? Okay, is that a fair question? Did I do okay with the question?
Well, it's a start. It's sort of the matter of what if the lifestyle of the Israelites involved eating meat, and we know it did.
Yeah.
Do we simply say, all right, that was okay then, and it's not okay now?
Yeah, that's exactly what we say. That's exactly what they said about the small farm animals grazing in the land of Israel, right? It was okay at one point, but our population has increased, and we need to make sure that we have enough food for everybody. So we're no longer going to allow small livestock grazing in the inhabited lands of Israel, right? We've done it before, and we can do it again. And we also did it, by the way, with the temple, right? We used to engage in these animal sacrifices at the temple. The temple was destroyed. We no longer engage in these animal sacrifices. So our focus shifted, right? It used to be that teshuvah was repentance or atonement was one aspect of a process that involved bringing an animal sacrifice. But once the address for the animal sacrifice was destroyed by the Romans in 70, then the only thing left of the atonement process was atonement itself. And so, in terms of our most important concept, right? The idea of reorienting ourselves, which is how I understand teshuvah, literally means it means turning. That becomes the most important concept in Judaism, and it is unalloyed with the kind of animal sacrificial ceremony and ritual that had previously accompanied it. Okay, Richard, I saw that you wanted to ask something or say
Yeah,
something.
I just want to push a little bit on what you include and what you exclude. So it's clearly from a statistical perspective, uh, beef represents the largest damage to the environment of all the animals. That I understand that, but people like Shai Cherry Cohen and David Rosen and the Rabbanut have gone further and specifically recommended the outlawing of all factory farm raised animals, including fowl and things like that. And I'm curious why you give a pass to that group when I mean it may be from a pure statistical level, it's not quite as environmentally damaging, but it's certainly in the same category. And so you seem to give a pass to that group as opposed to some other people that extend that prohibition further than you do.
So, Richard, help me understand, because I'm not familiar with their writing, with the language of their writing on this. Is it that they recommend or they prohibit?
I don't want to. I don't want to speak for them. I mean, I can tell you that the Shai Cohen, who was who he was,
Yeah.
and
David
a
Rosen.
major leader in the Jewish community, was a vegetarian his whole life, and he advocated. Now, it's interesting. You make a fair distinction. But there certainly was, but he and his student David Rosen, with whom I'm quite friendly, and I was also friendly with Shai Cohen. When there were not, they were clearly very vocal and outspoken about the fact that they felt that was it was halakhically problematic to allow any farm-raised animals. Now they did it on a variety of bases, some of them environmental, and some of them an understanding of what does it mean to be human and respect for all living creatures. But
okay, so now I will answer your question to the best of my sensibility, and that is that if I were to argue for the prohibition on factory farmed animals, there's no way I would have a chance at getting that language passed by the Conservative Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. So the expression in the Talmud is, if you grab for too much, you'll end up with nothing. So I don't want to grab for too much. I want to grab for something that I think I can justify, that I think has a chance of getting the endorsement of the movement.
Right. So I'm also an RA member and things like that, but leave that aside. Assuming you were not dealing on a very pragmatic level, is there a conceptual difference? I just want to push you on the conceptual difference. We live in a real world, and I understand fully that you're pushing for something that you feel maybe conceptually has at least theoretically has a chance to be adopted by the Committee on Law and Standards. I accept that. But I'm now asking you personally, if you were to follow the logic of what you've been advocating, would you then go so far as to say other factory farm animals should be prohibited? I'm just asking where you draw the line, and not because of practical reasons, but because of conceptual reasons.
Yeah, I have more trouble than I think you do distinguishing between practice and theory. So I've said that I'm a vegetarian, but I also understand that we live in a world where we pick our vices.
Okay.
And so I drink. I mean, I do other things that I fly in an airplane. So I'm not going to play holier than thou and say that you guys can't eat meat, but I can fly to South Africa for Limud in August, because I think that's hypocritical. So what I can do is say, look, this is just so disproportionately destructive. Let's get rid of factory farmed beef. And it really has to do with the level of damage, the disproportionate level of damage that I see beef doing.
Okay, no problem.
Jack, do we have time for Myron?
Yeah. If you're all right with it, let's one more question.
All right.
Oh,
Well,
before
Karen,
Myron,
wait,
there,
Karen,
I
did you
was
want to?
thought I'd say hello. Wow, I just enjoyed this. I don't live in Israel, and I born from mixed parentage, but I'm always just I'm fascinated by the how you unpack the spiritual writing, and it just opens up the door to look at more things, to unpack the Talmud and I just love it. And I know for me, when I was a young person, I found that place in the Bible where it says that it's around the Noah story that God has given us the plants for food. And I mean, I've gone in and out of vegetarianism all my life, but there's that place where it says, and no, it's rarely brought forth, but you know, that God has given us the plants to eat. And it doesn't say God has given us and the animals to care for.
Yeah,
So
so it actually, you've got the story flipped, Karen. In Genesis 1, in the creation story, we're given the plants to eat and the fruit. And after Noah comes out of the ark, then as a concession to the human appetite, we are allowed to eat certain animals killed in a certain way.
oh, okay, well, thank you. That helps.
You're welcome.
And I have a sponsor in a 12-step program, and she and her husband are strong vegans. And I told her about this today, and she wanted me to come. It's just I just really enjoyed how you like present that Jews need to be, that we're called upon to be more moral. Like if there's some other group of people that's being more moral than we are, we need to look at that. And right in the beginning, Myron said something about the fact about what Hillel said. And what Hillel says is what's unpleasant to you, don't do it to others. And I don't believe he said other humans. So
You're right. He did not. He did not.
And we've come into a world. I mean, if you watch TV these days, you've noticed a world where the animals are playing major roles that are unexpected. In my lifetime, you didn't see what you see now. And when I was young, you didn't see birds dancing and all this. So, we have to expand our horizon and do what's unpleasant to you. Don't do it to other living creatures.
Thank you, Karen. All right, I know that we've got a 4:30 session back at Limud. So thank you everybody for participating. I'm glad we had a chance to talk this through, and I look forward to more sessions with you all in the next couple of days. Jack, thanks so much.